This is the Indiana boot from Luosjiet. It kind of looks like an Alden Indy, doesn't it? But then, so does the Parkhurst Niagara. So what I wanted to do was to compare this pair of boots with a whole lot of others over a number of, well, in reality, quite subjective criteria, but let's do it anyway. G'day, my name is Tech and welcome to my channel, Bootlosophy, where I review boots, mostly. I'm filming on the traditional lands of the Luosjiet people of Noongar Boodja. Kalyakuri Kwajabe, Kalyakuri Bodabe. I'm taking another look at this pair of Luosjiet Indiana boots in the chrome-tanned, dark brown lychee bovine leather. I reviewed it recently, and yes, I know, if you're about to type in the comments below, "Hey mate, those look exactly like Alden Indies," don't waste your time. I already said it in my review. But if you did watch it, you saw that I was also reasonably impressed by the comfort and quality of the construction and the materials. They are indeed, an apron-stitched moc toe boot, 6 inches high, 360-degree Goodyear welted onto a soft wedge sole. It's proprietary wedge sole, is not a Vibram Christie, even though it looks like it. They use a leather split reverse welt, a leather midsole, cork filling, a leather insole, and even leather heel counters. They're fully leather lined on the inside with a suede patch in the heel and a half-length leather sock liner at the heel without any foam underneath, fully leather. And yes, they also have a steel shank. The leather is from Chinese tannery Prime Asia. It's full grain with an imprinted lychee or, Scotch grain style surface. It's over 2 millimeters thick. It has a medium to firm hand. It has softened quite a lot after 2 weeks wear and conditioning with R.M. Williams' leather conditioner. It was pretty much stiffer before. The hardware is solid brass. It's properly backed, and the speed hooks are the solid brass milled type and not just the bent over pieces of metal. Stitching and overall construction is very neat and precise. I am actually quite impressed by their quality, never mind the look. So I thought, let's give them their dues, treat them as if they were a standalone boot, and compare them to some similar boots. Now I'm thinking of the Alden Indy and the Parkhurst Niagara. Let's move this one. And I was also thinking of a couple of wedge sole type boots to compare comfort as well as quality construction. I'm going to leave links to all the boots I mentioned in the description area below. I think some of them are affiliates and some of them are not. This is the Alden Indy 405, the original Indy boots in the brown, original brown calf leather, which is in fact, it's a little bit more red ochre than brown. I think you have to say that the Luosjiet took its inspiration, copied, from the look of this famous boot. The Luosjiet's last has a very similar toe box to the Indy's. The Indy is a True Balance last. It's wider at the ball, rounds off at the toe, so they're both very comfortable in the toes. Where the lasts differ is in the waist. The Alden's True Balance cuts in at the waist, providing really good arch support under the arch from the uppers themselves, purely from a cantilever effect of that uppers leather tucking in. The Luosjiet feels looser and a bit baggier under the arch. Now, infamously, we're all now aware of the Alden boots using leather board inside the boot, whereas the Luosjiet Indiana is all veg tanned leather. The welt on the Luosjiet is leather, but it's thinner, and on the Indy, it's a fairly robust storm welt, but it only goes around 270 degrees. The Luosjiet has a French bound collar, while the Indy has a rolled top, which is basically the leather tucked into the lining. Aesthetically, they are so similar. The apron stitch in the contrasting thread, even the shape of the quarters, even that border stitch in the quarters coming from the back of the boot and up to the lace facings. In terms of construction, dare I say it, I think the Luosjiet are better made. On the Indy, the stitching at the end of the 270 welt, they get a little bit hinky. The stitches at the corner of the quarters, the reinforcing stitches at the end, they're not as precise and they're a little off. Now, the Indy is a slightly older boot in my collection, but the wear hasn't done that. They came with those inaccuracies. And if you look at this boot, the Parkhurst Niagara, you will also see that the stitching and the finish are actually better than the Alden. This, by the way, is the original MTO version of the Tannery Danone Navy Calf Niagara that was offered in 2022. Again, you know, a very similar boot to the Indy, isn't it? This is on Parkhurst's original 602 last, and so is a combination last like the True Balance, but has a more almond-shaped toe box, as you can see. Certainly more so than the Alden and the Luosjiet. So controversial, I know, but if you think the Luosjiet is a copy, the Parkhurst should be accused of it too, despite the slightly different stitching that's displayed in the quarters. However, even the Parkhurst is, I think, a better made boot with all leather materials than the Alden, and is slightly more finely made, I think, than the Luosjiet. Just goes to show, you know, if you rest on your laurels, original does not stay the best. Now, let me take a side tour on our journey. This is little-known Canadian brand Hanker, and this is their Nomad boot. Hanker make 3 different boot models, but basically they're all the same, except that the plain toe heeled model and the cap toe heeled model, they're called different names from this wedge sole model, but basically it's all the same uppers. The reason I pulled this out is to compare to the Luosjiet in the comfort factor. Now, to my mind, these 2 wedge sole boots, I think are probably the most comfortable from my wedge sole collection, with the possible exception of the Thursday Diplomat. Now, the Diplomat, I will add that one as one of my top 3 comfy wedge sole boots, but I'm not including it in this comparison. The Hanker Nomad is made in India with a medium temper full grain cowhide, but the standout factor is the comfort. The Hanker is 360-degree Goodyear welted. They use a leather insole, a steel shank, cork filling, and then a rubber slip sole before you put on the Vibram wedge sole. This is a proper Vibram Christie. The combination is incredibly comfortable when you stand on them all day. In comparison to the Luosjiet, the feel underfoot is the same. You know, you'd almost think that both have some sort of foam or poron layers, but neither of them do. I think a large part of the comfort that I feel is the type of leather they use for the insole, and in the case of the Luosjiet Indiana, the leather of the midsole as well. And in both models, the insole, midsole really seem to give under your feet. I also suspect both boots have a generous cork filling because I really can feel my feet sink in to form its own impression inside the boot. The rubber or PU composition of the wedge soles also will contribute a lot to the comfort. The Hanker is an older boot in my collection, but you know, I've probably worn both about the same in wear because I wore this a bit infrequently when I got it new, whereas I wore this straight for 2.5 weeks. At this stage, the Luosjiet proprietary PU wedge sole is wearing a little bit faster than the Vibram, but not by that much. So I suspect the PU in the Luosjiet is not as firm as the Vibram, but at this stage, both are really heavenly comfy. As we're talking about the comfort of wedge soles, time to bring in the Red Wing 875 Classic Moc Toe. This is now one of my more comfortable boots, but it wasn't always. It took me some time to break them in. Perhaps not as long and maybe not as full of blood and blisters as some other reviewers have said, but they certainly were not comfy at the very beginning. This is a true moc toe in the sense that it has 2 pieces of leather on the vamp that's stitched together at the apron of the toe box, while it is not a true lasted from underneath moccasin shoe. I wanted to compare these with the Luosjiet because they sell for, you know, about the same price. So purely from that angle, the Luosjiet is a lot more comfortable, even with the wedge of the Red Wing. Construction-wise, both are 360-degree welted, but the finish I think is far better in the Luosjiet. The 875's sanding of the edge of the sole comes really close to the edge stitching in places, and at the toe of this is the left boot, at the toe of the left boot almost takes out the edge stitch at the top. The SPI is inconsistent and overall less per inch than on the precisely stitched Luosjiet. The 875 is a lot older boot in my collection, and honestly I can't even really remember if those faults were there before. But they show some loose stitches and the rolled collar is kind of wobbly at the ends. The Luosjiet has a steel shank. The Red Wing, I believe, does not, relying on the thick leather insole and the wedge itself for the arch support. The Luosjiet is fully leather lined. The Red Wing is lined in the vamp and then unlined in the shaft. The inside of the Red Wing boot is, more poorly finished. And I have to say where most of the pain on breaking in was. The inside edges of the quarters, when they're stitched, were very poorly skived and they sat there rubbing into the sides of my feet every time I took a step. Look, I know one looks and is a work boot and the other is not. But at the same price, roughly, the Luosjiet wins hands down for construction and materials advantages. And while we're on proper moc toe styles, here's the Grantstone brass boot. This one comes in Charles F. Stead's Earth Waxy Commander Wax Suede on a Grantstone Commando sole and a leather stacked heel. The reason I brought this out is to look at construction quality because both of these boots are made in China. As I always say, quality is not geography. It's about process control and quality inspection and sign-off and how stringent those are applied in your factory. The brass boot is a much heavier boot than the Luosjiet, nearly 950 grams versus just under 600. Yet, for its weight, the brass boot is remarkably comfortable. I think because of the last, it's roomy in the toe box, and the all leather and cork layers underneath again. The hard rubber Commando soles, they don't seem to detract from the comfort when they sometimes often do. And it's supported by the soft upper leather and leather lining for comfort. The design is different enough, and I always praise the Grantstone brass for being innovative in the sense that they created a moc toe, a design that's been around since Red Wing brought it out in the 1950s, that looks different from other moc toes. It does not have the ridged toe box of the 875, but it does have high sidewalls in the vamp, unlike the Alden Indy. It doesn't look like the Indy despite the inboard moc toe stitch. It's genius. Quality-wise, I can't fault either boot. I have always praised Grantstone for their production quality, their care in stitching and finishing. And in the Luosjiet, I think they may have found their match. When you compare the two, you have to acknowledge both use good materials in their all-leather construction. Yes, I grant you this is a Chinese tanned leather and this is Charles F. Stead, but you can get these in a better leather. They both have excellent finishing and detailing, and they're both sturdily made. But while we're looking at the Luosjiet against the Grantstone, I want to bring out the Grantstone diesel boot on the wedge sole. I think they've discontinued this form of their diesel boot, but I love the diesel's design and the Leo last. And when made with the Vibram cavity wedge sole, I think that's really beautiful. I think this is the Vibram 2060, made of a softer rubber compound than the Christie. I just wanted to bring this out to quickly mention that I find these a little uncomfortable because for some reason, the balls of my feet seem to feel that it's really hard underneath them. Now, I don't really understand why. The construction is the same as all other diesel boots, which I find comfortable. There's a veg tan insole, there's cork filler, there's a veg tan midsole, quite a thick one, and there is a shank. Yet in this case, even with that soft cavity wedge, I come home after a day in these with sort of painful bottoms of the ball of my feet. This struck me when I first started wearing the Luosjiet because for the same construction, the Luosjiet Indiana is much softer underfoot and more comfy. Can anyone explain that to me? So in summary, I think the Luosjiet for their price compare very favorably with the Alden Indy, the Hanker, and the Red Wing offerings. They sell for US $259. The Indy sells for over 700 US, the Red Wing for over 300. Grant Stone are now over 400. For the quality, they compare well in price with all of them. For comfort, they compare very well against the Red Wing and, probably as good against all the others. In my opinion though, they are slightly more comfy than the others, but it's a very personal choice. All in all, despite the look-alike nature of the design, but then don't forget the Parkhurst, by the way, they come out looking reasonably well against competition, and I think at that price, a really good value buy. One issue may be the sizing. They are inconsistent by the accounts of several reviews and Reddit articles and so on, but I find mine passable for what I ordered. It fits well enough. Okay, so that's it. I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you for watching, and I hope you will come back. Don't forget to click on like if you like this video, help me out. And of course, if you like this sort of content, if you like what you see, don't forget to click on subscribe. So long, I'm back next week. Be good out there, be careful, and I'll see you back here soon.